What's up guys, Kevin from ProX here with another tech tip for you, and today we're going to go over how to replace the front and rear sprockets on your dirt bike. Before we jump into replacing these sprockets, we'll go over a couple key tips on inspecting your sprockets for wear. The easiest way to inspect your sprockets is to look at the teeth visually, both on the rear and the countershaft sprocket. When your sprockets are worn, you'll notice a key difference between the engaged side of the tooth and the non-engaged side. In severe cases, some teeth may be completely rounded off or even broken. ProX rear sprockets are available in steel and aluminum. ProX steel sprockets come in an ultralight design, and the aluminum sprockets are made from 7075 T6 material. ProX countershaft sprockets are also made from steel and are case hardened for corrosion resistance and wear resistance. Once you have all the components you need and you're ready to take these old sprockets off, don't take your rear wheel off just yet. You'll need to leave the wheel on so that you can loosen the countershaft nut. If you take the wheel and chain off, the countershaft will just spin when you're trying to loosen the nut. There's a couple ways you can loosen this nut. Some people will have someone hold the rear brake while they loosen it, or an electric impact is also a great tool that makes it easy to get off. Now we're ready to start removing the old sprockets. Starting with the countershaft sprocket, you're first going to want to make sure any countershaft or case guards are out of the way. Next, we're going to use an impact to remove the countershaft sprocket nut. In this particular case, we're replacing the chain as well, so we've taken the chain off after loosening the countershaft sprocket nut. Now we can remove the countershaft sprocket, but as you do this, remember each bike has different components on the countershaft sprocket nut, so pay close attention to any components that come along with it. Now we have the countershaft sprocket and the chain off, so we're going to go ahead and take the rear wheel off. We're just going to loosen the rear axle nut and slide the rear axle out. Now we have the rear wheel off, so it's time to take the rear sprocket off. When you're taking the rear sprocket off, make sure you do not rest your wheel on the rotor side. You don't want your rotor on the ground because if you're putting extra torsion on it, you don't want to bend the rotor. When you're removing the sprocket bolts, make sure you remove them in a crisscross pattern. When you're replacing your rear sprocket, it's a good idea to check your rear sprocket bolts. Rear sprocket bolts are frequently suggested to be replaced because they're subjected to a lot of torque from the chain driving the rear sprocket. Today we're using a ProX rear sprocket bolt kit that comes with all the bolts and nylon lock nuts. When you're putting these on, make sure that you're using thread locking compound on your bolts. Your owner's manual should give you the type of thread locking compound that they suggest. Just like when you took the bolts off, it's a good idea to put them back on in a star pattern. Get them all finger tight and started first, and then go around and torque them to the specification in your owner's manual. Now we're ready to put the new front sprocket on. Before we do that, we made sure that we cleaned up around the countershaft from any old chain grease or things like that. As you're putting the new front sprocket on, make sure you're putting the components back in the same order that you took them apart. As we mentioned, different countershaft sprockets on different bikes have different components. So for this one, an example, there's a new O-ring here in this seal, and as we reassemble it, we want to make sure everything goes back the same way it came apart. Also, your countershaft sprocket does go a certain way, so make sure it is facing the correct orientation when you reinstall it. For countershaft sprockets that use countershaft bolts, your owner's manual should give you a thread locking compound spec that they suggest that you use. So now we have the rear wheel on, the new rear sprocket on, and the new countershaft sprocket on. Now that everything's attached and ready to go, we need to make sure that the countershaft nut is torqued to spec. Again, make sure that you look the spec up in your owner's manual. In this specific case, the torque spec is 100 Newton meters. So we're going to torque this nut to 100 Newton meters. Make sure you have an accurate torque wrench. When you do this, it's a good idea to have someone hold the rear brake for you, because if you don't, you're just going to end up spinning the gears and you're not going to get the torque out of it. Push it really hard. There we go. Once you have all your new components installed and ready to go, double check that everything is tight and everything is torqued to spec, and then you're ready to set your chain slack adjustment. Refer to your owner's manual for the correct chain slack that you should have to your bike. Torque your rear axle nut once that is set, and then you're ready to ride.